go ahead and get started. So first off, I just want to welcome all of you to the project team. We're very grateful, obviously, for you taking this time out of your evening to join us to talk about this important subject. As stakeholders and project partners, you're all well aware of the flood risks and the threats that are very, very present in the Point of Pines area as well as the Riverside. So I'm glad to see that a lot of folks are able to participate. I'm also grateful to the stakeholders from the state agencies that have been able to join us today and to partner with us. So thank you for being here. Just to give you a brief overview, so we have had one internal kickoff meeting that we were able to meet with some of the project partners and just sort of get things underway. As the project progresses, we'll have some other stakeholder meetings that will be not a public forum, but we'll have some stakeholder meetings that will work through more of a working group meeting and a workshop. And this meeting is designed to just let everybody know that we are kicking off this project. We're happy to have all of our project partners, the project consultants, and our key stakeholders here with us. So that said, I'd like to also thank Mayor Rigo for his support for this project. He's unable to attend tonight, but we do have JD Hermio on his assistant that is here on the call with us. And also thank you to Ward 5 Councillor John Powers for being on board with this resiliency study for this important resiliency effort. So with that said, I'd like to introduce Aaron Wynath. He is from AECOM and he will be the consultant on this project, and he has his team as well on the call, and he'd like to introduce them and we'll get the ball rolling. I would like to ask everybody to stay muted if you're not speaking, just so that we can prevent any feedback or background noise. And then any of the attendees that wish to speak, just use the raise your hand feature and we will call on you as soon as we are able to do so. Any of the panelists, you are free to speak at any time. You just need to unmute yourself and feel free to jump into the conversation. And a recording is being made and we are streaming live. So if anybody was not able to attend, we can provide the link after the meeting. So thanks so much. And I'm going to turn it over to Aaron. Thank you.
Thank you, Elle, and thank you everyone who's joined us tonight. Really do appreciate the time that you're taking. This is really a critical piece of the overall study, getting to talk to the stakeholders and partners, hear from you, and have you contribute to this really community-driven process and get in touch with you early on in the project. So as Elle mentioned, my name is Aaron Wynath. I work with AECOM, and I will be doing primarily most of the presentation, but I do have several of my colleagues here who have joined us and are able to participate in the discussion and answer questions as they may come up. Their names are Brian Stobie, Ricky Torres-Cuban, and Amanda Shanahan. We were going to stop short of doing complete introductions just for sensitive to the time. So that's why we had that slide there, but it shows that this is really supported by a large number of different entities, groups, and we have a lot of great partners in this, and we're very excited about that. So here's the agenda for what we're hoping to cover tonight. Going to provide a little bit of background to how we got to this study. Several of you, I think, were participants in the earlier municipal vulnerability preparedness planning process. That really led to what we're doing today, this study to look at coastal resilience feasibility for the Point of Pines and Riverside area. Talk about the schedule, some other relevant projects that are going on that we're coordinating with, and then really, the meat of this is to hear from you and respond to your questions. And as Elle mentioned, we are reserving time for the Q&A and discussion. Primarily at the end, we want to just get through this material as quickly as we can. But if there is something that comes up and we need to clarify, I think Elle will help moderate that and let me know if we need to pause. So the background, again, the city participated in the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, received a planning grant that allowed them to become an MVP eligible designated community. There was a core team established, several of the individuals from the city participating tonight were on that core team, and myself and some of my colleagues were involved with that process as well. During this process, and it was really kind of followed a community resilience building workshop process, and led to development of a resilience action plan, very community driven, which is similar to what we're trying to do for this action grant here that's funding the study. Throughout this process, there was the identification of the Point of Pines Riverside area as the most vulnerable area of the city that really started to come up and filter up to the top of the areas of concern for the city. And also through this process, different priority actions were identified based on the issues that we're seeing based on the climate projections, the historic issues that were being experienced in the city. And what led to the top, as you can see here, based on the voting that was done through that workshop process, the top vote getter was looking at seawall construction and rehabilitation of the Point of Pines Riverside area. But before you really kind of jump ahead and look at reconstructing what's there, you really want to understand what's changing, what the real problem is. There might be some different ways to look at it, structural, nature-based solutions. So we really wanted to look at identifying the suite of options that are appropriate. And so what was identified as the top priority action to proceed with for further action was conducting this feasibility study, which is what is playing out right now and what we're getting your feedback on. So for those who don't live in the area or haven't been out there on the site to visit, we just wanted to put up a few photographs demonstrating some of the current conditions. So this is more on the Point of Pines side, which is more of that natural beach coastline. So there are some dunes and dune grasses, erosion that's being seen. The seawalls that are there are doing their job, but there's some deterioration of some of those seawalls. The area's also been a beneficiary of some of the sand nourishment project that was further down gradient that's migrated up and deposited and actually led to some deposition of the Point of Pines. So there's actually been some beach creation. But as you can see in that bottom right photo, it's almost a little too much of a good thing in some respects. In some of the storms, the winds blowing the sand over the seawall into the streets of the neighborhood. These are some photos that were taken by some residents, I think, during the nor'easters of 2018, which are probably still pretty fresh in people's memories. Again, this is not an issue that is projected to be experienced going forward. The neighborhoods are experiencing issues with coastal flooding and natural hazards today. And this is demonstrated by the photos that you see here. The overtopping of the seawalls on the top left, on the Point of Pines side. The photograph showing the flooding Mills and River Avenue on the inland side near the Pines River, and kind of the flooded streets. And here's again the trucking out of the sand that's coming over top the dunes and the seawalls. And I wanted to provide a few maps to kind of demonstrate kind of what's known and mapped today and kind of the future projected conditions that are expected over this planning horizon that we're looking at. So it's not the most pretty map that I'm sharing with you, but this is basically to identify, this is what's currently mapped as FEMA flood zones. So this is based on historic data. It's primarily for insurance purposes, but you'll see the majority of the study area is within the existing mapped 100-year flood zone, or the 1% annual recurrence of flooding, or in that yellow hatching area, that's the VE zone. That's kind of the coastal high hazard zone. So that gets the wave action and other issues that are facing the community in some of those coastal storm events. There's a little high area along Route 1A that's white, but you can see most of the built up area of the study area is within the current mapped flood zones. But again, one of the main focuses of this study is not looking at what's happened in the past. We understand that climate is changing, conditions are going to be different than what we're seeing today. And so a big element is looking at projected coastal flooding as it relates to the study area. And we're very fortunate as far as timing for this study. Earlier, there was a Boston Harbor flood risk model that was developed as part of the Central Artery Project, which was used to identify issues related to storm surge and coastal flooding for some of the Boston Harbor general area. This was recently updated and data is released and is available for us to use. It's called the Massachusetts Coast Flood Risk Model. Steve Miller from Mass DOT is really involved with that effort and is one of the partners for this study. And so we're really, really fortunate to have him as part of this overall effort. But just in a nutshell, this coastal flood model was expanded to really cover the entire coastline. So initially Revere was not included in the extent of the previous model, but now it is. And it provides modeling for projected sea level rise conditions and coastal storm events. And it's worth noting that this does not take into consideration extreme precipitation events or inland flooding. This is looking mostly at the coastal storm surge, sea level rise issues. And it's really used to help support these types of analyses that we're doing for Revere. And again, it's just recently become available, and it's going to be one of the main pieces of data that we're looking at as we're exploring options. And results are available for present day, and then a few future planning horizons, the years 2030, 2050, and 2070. And there's some basic assumptions behind this model. I believe the sea level rise is projected to increase about 4.3 feet over the next 50 years. And this is consistent with what the state is doing generally as far as its overall planning efforts to help support some consistency in various resilience activities throughout the Commonwealth. So there's a few different data sets that are available for us to use. And I won't get down into the weeds, but I just wanted to give you an overview of what we're going to be able to look at. One of these is called the Annual Coastal Flood Exceedance Probability. So this is really looking at the likelihood that an area could be flooded in a future event. It ranges from, a very unlikely chance, with a 0.1%. So we're looking at a really significant event like the 1,000-year storm, to 100% chance of being wet in a given year. This isn't saying you're going to be underwater for the entire calendar year, but for 1% chance in a given year, or one time in that year, there's an opportunity or a probability that you could experience some flooding. Then also to help inform the selection of the appropriate coastal resilience measures, there's flood depth maps. So in addition to the probability, we can understand what the projected flood depth is for certain future storm events. And they're available for the 1% storm, which is equivalent to the 100-year storm that you hear about a lot, and then some other events. And I wanted to share a few images showing some of the data for this annual coastal flood exceedance probability. So this is, again, kind of the likelihood that portions of the study area could be exposed to coastal flooding in the future. So in the legend that you can see here, kind of the reds and oranges, that's kind of the lower probability. So for the most part, you aren't projected to have much flooding in those areas. As you progress down, you'll see the percents increasing up to that 100% that I was talking about. And that's, again, not saying this gray area in the Point of Pines is going to be underwater the entire year. This is just saying that in any given year, there's a chance that there could be some flooding in this area based on the projected storms and modeling that was conducted. So this is a snapshot of present day. And I have a few series kind of showing what the projected changes are going forward. And again, this is primarily based on that Massachusetts Coast Flood Risk Model. And it's limited to what data goes into that model, but it's the best available information that we have, and we're going to be harnessing for this study. So this is going to the year 2030. You'll see I'll toggle back and forth so you can kind of see the changing colors. Here, the brighter colors is actually a little better because it's lower percent probability. As you get to 2030, you see a little bit more of the grays and the darker colors, suggesting that greater chance of being flooded in any given year. Going out further to 2050, you see that progression more. And then 2070, that's the farthest planning horizon for which this data is currently available. They are looking into creating data sets that go beyond this to 2100, but this is as far out as we're looking at currently for this study. But you can see why this area was identified as a top priority for the city to examine and look at ways to help build resilience to what's projected to be faced in this area. You're seeing the vast majority of the study area is projected to be flooded at some point in time in a given year. And this just helps inform us and understanding where the flood pathways are, where the earlier, more priority low-lying areas may be that we need to focus our efforts on. but this is just sharing some of the background information that we're going to be using to inform the study. And again, this isn't a new concern or a new issue. People who have lived in the neighborhoods in the study area have been facing coastal flooding for some time. And back in the 80s, the Army Corps conducted a study looking at recommendations for this area. The study was not fully implemented. Some repairs and improvements were made. And subsequent to this study, there was more of a regional study and floodgates project that was proposed. It's being revisited. So again, this is not something that's just hitting the city now. It's something that's been looked at for several decades. And I think the time is right to really take another hard look at this and coordinate with other projects that are going on in the area to really make some moves in the right direction. For the study area, one thing that we had to consider is ownership of property. This is not all city-owned property. There's a lot of private property in this area. And for moving forward and implementing actions that might be identified out of this, we need to be aware of that, understand if it's going to be in city-owned property or private property. If there's a need to put something on someone's land, there may need to be a need to identify a conservation easement, some types of restriction to allow that to happen on property that isn't owned and controlled by the city. So that's something that will inform and be considered as some of the options that we look at. And like I said, this has been, an issue that the city has been facing for quite some time, but we're wanting to take a fresh look at it and conduct this new feasibility to identify potential resilience and adaptation measures for the Point of Pines and Riverside area. Again, as I mentioned before, this was a top priority action identified during the workshops that were done earlier, and the city was successfully awarded MVP Action Grant, which they were eligible to do because they were a certified MVP community. So we really have a lot of thanks to give the MVP program of the state for funding this project and allowing us to move forward. And we do have a representative from the MVP program on this call, and again, one of the partners of the overall study. So again, thank you very much for helping this project move forward.
What's our sign say?
So the next slide here, this is just kind of an overview of what this current, fresh look will be comprised of. There's 6 overall tasks, and I'll walk through each of those pretty quickly here. So we again save time for the discussion at the end. But the first task, we're really getting underway tonight with this workshop. This is a big element of the overall study. Again, hearing from the community, conveying the results that we're seeing, and getting your input as we move forward into the future phases of the project is really important for the success of this. So tonight, this is the first workshop. We're presenting the scope of work. I'm doing that right now. We're seeking that initial checkpoint, which is really important to help guide us going forward. The second workshop, we'll be sharing findings of some of the earlier tasks, and then we'll wrap things up in the third workshop, presenting the findings and kind of identifying those next steps. So we hope you're going to stay with us throughout the project, because it's going to be a really good process, and really value your input and time. So the second task, it's assessment of current and future conditions. This is looking at kind of the FEMA mapping that I was showing you, the projected flood modeling. We're looking at case studies of what other coastal communities have done who are facing these issues to learn from those experiences. We're obtaining various information to review, looking at past studies. We're in the trenches doing this now. So this is going to be culminating in a memo that's kind of summarizing what's available, what we know, and how it's going to be used and inform the selection of resilience measures. And while we're looking at kind of the longer term as our end goal, how to protect the area, it's really important, I think, for the city to be able to identify some of those nearer term or shorter term measures to help prevent some relief sooner, while funding is identified to implement potentially some of those larger dollar projects, or some projects that are going to take some more time to design and permit and get in the ground. So as part of this overall study, we're looking at kind of that shorter term window and looking at potential deployable barriers that could help hold back some floodwaters that are currently being experienced, let alone 30 years from now. We're also looking at expanding and improving a beach management plan to help make sure that what the Point of Pines Beach Associations, for instance, is doing can be looked at closely, see if there's any recommendations that could be made to help improve the resources and this natural defense that the community currently has. We're also going to be examining the city's emergency response plan and kind of inform it based on what we're seeing for this study area and propose possible recommendations for improvements to that plan as well. Then the next step or the task is looking at various options that could be implemented. We're calling it a toolkit. Think of a toolbox. There's no one size fits all for the study area. You have the natural side of the beach on the Point of Pines area. You have more of the hard infrastructure roadways that are being undercut and eroded away on the Pines Riverside. So we're looking at different options that could be considered as we move forward. And there are going to be a variety of things, looking at, ranging from seawalls, gretties to more of the nature-based solutions, living shorelines, looking at some wetland restoration. We aren't ruling out anything at this point. This is really looking at that resource of things that we could apply and consider moving forward, depending on the applicability of the areas. Then task 5, it's going to be looking at the results of our vulnerability assessment, considering what's in that toolbox, those ideas that we came up with, and coming up with some criteria to help us inform the decisions of what might be the best opportunities for the different areas of the study area. Some possible criteria that we'll be looking at: cost, ownership, community acceptance. It's really important that what's proposed is something that the community can get behind and support. And then also look at those potential easements requirements if we're looking at providing interventions on private property. And then the last task, this is all rolling up into a final report. Very importantly, is going to be including an implementation plan. Again, this is something that the city does not want to just stop at a report. We want to put together actionable plans that the city can move forward with. So we'll be assigning action items, responsibilities, and helping with identification of funding sources to help move things forward. I won't get into the details of the project schedule, but just in general, here we are right before the holidays in December, or in the holidays if you're celebrating Hanukkah, like my family is. We're going through the end of June 2021, and you can see kind of the concurrence of the tasks here. We're starting with the first workshop here in December. I mentioned we have 2 other workshops proposed. The next one is identified to happen in February, and you can see that it's lining up at the tail end of some of these initial tasks, so we can share how we're progressing with the study, and again, get that important feedback from you. Also, there's a lot going on in the city of Revere and in the study area. I just wanted to make sure to share with you, and Elle and Frank may have some additional items to add to some of these projects that they're a little closer to than I am. But these are other activities that are happening that are very relevant to what we're going to be looking at for the feasibility study. There's the Boston Region MPO Route 1A Corridor Vulnerability Assessment. That was just recently released. The Boston Region MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization, identified Route 1A as a pilot to conduct a vulnerability assessment on. And so they have really helpful results that we're using and leveraging to inform this study. The Department of Conservation and Recreation will be initiating a vulnerability assessment of a few of their properties next year, including Revere Beach Reservation. So we'll be keeping tabs on what's happening with that. And again, DCR is one of the participants and partners on this study. So we'll be coordinating with them as it's appropriate. Also, there's a Riverfront District Master Plan that's ongoing in a portion of the study area. There's an inset image right here that's showing the general footprint of that study. And there's also a boatyard project looking at community rowing facility. So there's a lot of moving pieces, and we basically just wanted to share them with you at a high level and let you know that we are coordinating with them and aligning the efforts and interests to make sure that we all are well informed going forward. I did want to share a little bit of information that was provided to me for the Riverfront District Master Plan. This is really looking at not necessarily neighborhood-wide flood control and management, but looking at the existing footprint of that master plan area and really focusing on stormwater management and helping improve existing conditions to the extent they can. And this is going to kind of fit into our overall study. And again, the idea is to communicate with that team and understand what's being proposed so that when we come through and do our assessment, that we are not putting up an idea that's going to conflict with what's being proposed through this planning process. Again, we'll go into a lot of the details here, but they broke up the drainage areas for the contributing study area. There's not a whole lot of existing storage capacity beyond the site just kind of flooding, and there's some restrictions due to the tide conditions and the outfalls. Again, here's just a graphic showing those drainage tributary areas. And some of the proposed improvements that they're looking at, in addition to surface retention, they're looking for subsurface areas to kind of store some of that during a storm event. And based on the constraints of the sites, they aren't really looking at necessarily future projected conditions. They're looking at current design storms and doing what they can within the site. And we'll be kind of coordinating and picking up from that, considering that as we move forward with more of the study area wide efforts to look at more of the neighborhood wide protection. And again, here's a graphic showing some of the proposed stormwater management elements of the site, the subsurface storage, getting to some of the more of the nature-based and natural elements, rain gardens, salt marsh creation. They're coming up with some creative solutions for that site. And I believe that is primarily the bulk of what I wanted to get through as part of our formal presentation. I covered a lot of material and not a lot of time, so I'm sure there's some questions that people have, and we're happy to go back and revisit some of the slide materials. But as we mentioned earlier, we wanted to reserve sufficient time to really hear questions, concerns from everyone who's participating, including some of the panelists here too, some of our partners, if they had things to add. But at this point in time, I believe Elle, I'm going to turn things over to you to help moderate this, and I will pause there, but thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Aaron. I also wanted to just bring up also that the City of Revere has also submitted an application to the Army Corps of Engineers for a regional, potentially a regional floodgate or regional flood barrier prevention across the mouth of the Saugus River and Pines River. So I just wanted to let you know that that project is potentially in the pipeline as well. We should hear more about that late spring, early summer. So as this project is starting to wrap up. I also just wanted to mention, just wanted to introduce Carolyn, who's on the call. She is representing the MVP from Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. And without the funding, this project wouldn't be happening. So we're grateful for your support and thank you. And at that time, I would like to open the floor. If anybody has any comments, questions, concerns, anything you'd like to raise, now is the time. And we're happy to hear from you.
Elle, this is Bob O'Brien. Could I ask a question?
Of course.
Aaron, you noted that the primary focus of this study will be coastal flooding as opposed to inland flooding. I assume inland flooding includes rain events, etc. I was actually struck by the map that showed Riverside, which we know experiences flooding fairly consistently, in the less than worst conditions. And it occurred to me that may be because a lot of that flooding has to do with inland flooding and rain events. How are you going to relate the inland flooding issue with the coastal flooding? How do you take it into account? Because I would expect, the perfect storm scenario is when both coastal storms and inland flooding coincide. So how will you take inland flooding into account, if at all?
Yeah, good question, Bob. So the modeling, the maps that I showed, that's where I made a note to distinguish between kind of the coastal and the inland precipitation. So that modeling result does not really factor in those extreme precipitation events, other than just some of the major coastal storms that are modeled and coming in and what's associated with those. We will be looking at what's available as far as projections for precipitation. to my knowledge, the city doesn't have a detailed drainage model for this portion of the city that we really have kind of a modeled system, a closed pipe system, kind of understand kind of dynamically what the flooding is associated with the drainage system. But we do have anecdotal information. We do have other mapping and reports that we can draw from. And also what's really important to consider for some of those coastal interventions is, you have to be careful when you start building up, height, or, whether it's a seawall or some other berm, that you have to be considerate of drainage behind that. So that's, you aren't just perhaps holding back water from the coast, but making things worse behind based on the interior drainage and flooding issues that you were just noting. So they will be definitely factored into our assessment and overall evaluation. And I don't know, Brian Stobie, if you're on the line, or if you have anything to add based on your experiences doing other projects, something else that's worth noting as far as how we'll be addressing that.
Yeah, I just think, I mean, obviously we can't not look at it, but sometimes they're too, they're dependent, and we find a lot of times the coastal storms have very little storm events the storm event is much smaller than the coastal storm. But yeah, Aaron, you run into the bathtub effect if you block off with walls and if you keep a blind eye to it, it's a bad thing, because you end up with retaining so much water and ponding if you don't address the rainwater storm to some extent.
I would just add, we're looking at Point of Pines and Riverside together, but I think each of them is subject to different types of flooding influences, and we should probably make appropriate distinctions between them.
So can I add a comment? This is Steve from MassDOT.
Yes, Steve.
There's a big difference between storm surge and piped infrastructure. So generally speaking, when it comes to storm surge, it overwhelms the precipitation factor. It's incredible. So when you talk about piped infrastructure, you're going to consider tide gates and all of that as part of the protections, because if without tide gates, water does go up those pipes and can flood beyond a seawall. And the best example I can provide is the Boston Water and Sewer Commission. They've done a great study of piped infrastructure. And so I guess consider that as part of your project, is that when you get waves cresting over seawalls and ponding water, it can get overwhelming. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Anyone else have any questions? Comments?
Ellie?
Yes.
Hi, it's Elaine.
Hi, Elaine. Go ahead.
I live on the corner of Mills and River, and my area floods all the time. It just comes right over the street. You could have come down today. It was up to my garage. You can come down tomorrow. You can come down Thursday, the day of the storm, and I'm sure it'll be way past the garage. So we get it at full moon tides. It's not a storm. It's just a full moon. And that tide just comes across the street, goes up River Ave, goes down into the boatyard, goes up there Ave. So that has nothing to do with a storm. It just has to do with the full moon tides. And if the tides are 11 foot, 12 foot, that we get more water. I just want to let you guys know that. As far as the flood, they call it flood gate on the catch basin, it hasn't worked. It worked once when they first put it in for one storm. It hasn't worked since. So the water just comes right up to pole across the street, the pipe across the street, and comes right up to our catch basins. And I'd just like to make a comment about the floodgates. I did work with that steering committee for about 40 years. That was the best thing that could ever possibly happen to our area, and all the way up into the estuary, Saugus, all up that way. And it's just about what I want to tell you.
Thank you, Elaine. We do hope that we'll be able to revitalize that project. We have a number of people working towards advocating for that in many different arenas. So we do hope that that study that was so thorough and so many years ago, we recognize that the condition, it was not stopped because the conditions improved. And, you know, we definitely feel that that would be a benefit to the region as a whole. You are on mute, so if you're commenting back, I can't hear you. I can see you talking. Thank you, Elaine.
Elaine, that happens once a month during the highest astronomical tide.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's sometimes, you know, depending on how many times we have that high tide, it could be more than once a month. And it depends on the way the wind's blowing. I mean, I've had it that the tide was turned and it was horrendous. It knocked out half the boats over there at the yacht club and it was already turned. So it depends on the way the wind blows.
Okay. Joe, Mag, do you have any comments there? Okay, seems to him on.
Elle, could I make one other comment?
Yes, please go ahead, Bob.
With regard to the MPO study, which I think is very timely and very relevant. What was interesting to me when they were making some suggestions as to what could be done along the Route 1A corridor, they were more definitive and more assertive with regard to interventions not adjacent to residential neighborhoods. But of course, everything we're talking about here is adjacent to a residential neighborhood. So it would be very interesting how whatever comes out of this study can complement the MPO study with regard to what we can do adjacent to the Riverside and Point of Pines neighborhoods. That's the really challenging part. And I'm not sure MPO has yet addressed that.
Thank you, Bob. I do think it's timely in that all of these projects are interwoven and overlapping critical infrastructure as well as residential.
Can I add a comment? This is Steve Miller. Can I add a comment?
Yes, go right ahead, Steve. Thank you.
So I got the MPOs involved in this because there's a need for a regional solution for supply chain routes that are on the coast. Not only supply chain, but general commuting. And so I'm hoping that the MPO study will consider the susceptibility to 1A of routine flooding in the future and what that means to the neighborhoods and to the cities that 1A connects. And so I hope there's a wider lens than just Revere as to how the coast looks in the future. Just some thoughts, that's all.
Thank you.
Aaron, could I ask a question about the Seagate, which Elaine mentioned, among others? I think Elle mentioned it as well. Will the Seagate be among the options that will be considered as part of this study? The interesting thing to me is that there are sort of intermodal issues involved with that, because we are also looking at the redesign and replacement of the General Edwards Bridge, and it has intrigued me that it might be possible to build a Seagate feature into that bridge if DOT and EOEA and a lot of other people got together and started planning for some of these resiliency options together. So I know this is coming again, as Elle suggested, toward the end of this study, but will it be a feature of what we look at as well? Because it could be fundamentally important.
Short answer is yes, it will be considered and definitely acknowledged in the study. I know Frank, who's involved, has a wealth of experience from the past efforts and study, and we've been engaged with the city recently on some discussions about the kind of reviving that and the region kind of banding together to try to put that in. So, I mean, the study that's funded here, it's really focused not necessarily so much as a regional solution, but that's what it's going to take in some respects, as Steve made the comment about not just focused on Revere, looking at some of the neighboring communities. The floodgate project is definitely more of that regional scale. It's not something that Revere alone can take on, but it's something that could be part of the overall program that's looked at going forward to build resilience for this area. But Elle or Frank, do you have anything else to add to that apart from just, yes, it will be part of the overall considerations?
Yeah, we certainly have to recognize it in this effort. As you say, it is more of a regional solution than our scoped work is concentrated on, but it is the save-all solution for the backshore areas of Revere in Route 1A, in the Riverside, in Oak Island, and all the way up to Saugus and Lynn, Everett, and Malden. So it's very important. It was actually authorized back in 1992 and ready for construction. We were on our way there, but the State Environmental Agency at the last second pulled the rug underneath it. So we're working hard to get that project back on the front burner through congressional reauthorization. And when, as Al said, we're looking at other applications through the Army Corps of Engineers to restudy it and bring it back to life.
Aaron and company, it's in that context that I mention it, because to some extent, understanding this is a regional solution somewhat beyond our purview, some of these things are kind of part of a self-fulfilling prophecy. If it becomes part of the recommendations of this group, that becomes part of the advocacy, politically and otherwise, to actually revitalize the Seagate idea. So the more we can support that, even though it's a little bit beyond our view, the more likely it is to happen, because a lot of advocacy is still required for that to be revitalized.
Excellent point, Bob. Thank you. Councilor Powers?
Yes, the question I have is, how do you abate the overtopping down on River John, the old boatyard, that area there, in the immediate time? Hello?
Yes.
Darren, going to answer?
Aaron? So
I wasn't sure if I didn't make out the entire question. I'm sorry.
Okay.
So I'll repeat the
I'll repeat
question.
myself. How do you abate the overtopping? And that's a major problem down there on that end of Mills Avenue. In the immediate time now, without seawalls or anything like that. I think my own opinion from what I've seen down there, and I'm not an engineer and I don't pretend to be an expert, but I would certainly think that to correct that right now would be to have some type of a seawall in that area running along Mills Avenue.
And Aaron, you showed some temporary solutions that might be responsive to John's question.
Right, and that's what we'll be doing as one of the task 3, identifying the short-term measures that could be put forward as more of a near-term solution, not necessarily a permanent solution, but something that could be put in place a little bit more easily than some of those larger infrastructure projects. So it could be in the form of deployable barriers. There was a graphic showing a representative example of one of those, but that could be kind of a near-term fix to have something in place. They're doing it, for example, think about some MBTA stations that are coastal, and if there's a big storm event that's forecast, they have some barriers that they can put around the entries to kind of seal off or hold back the waters. So that's one of those areas in the study area that's clearly it's experiencing a lot of flooding today. Again, as we heard, not during big storm conditions, just even during astronomical high tides. That could be an appropriate area for one of those potential short-term measures that could be examined and identified for kind of the near-term needs to help provide some relief.
And as Aaron mentioned, so we are looking at both short-term and long-term solutions. And as we all know, the longer-term solutions require additional studies, additional planning, and additional funding. So this is really important that this study that we're involved in right now, we're looking at both short-term and long-term. So sort of, what are the attainable methods that we can begin flood protection right away versus the things that we are going to do something temporary and then we're going to plan to implement longer-term solutions. So as we've seen in the models, we're under the conditions right now on Mills Ave are dire and they need to be addressed immediately. So finding those short-term solutions immediately that can be attainable while we plan for the future flood protection, I think is really important. McMalazen, did you have a question?
Yeah, well, not a question, just kind of to reiterate what you just said and what Councilor Powers said. That Mills Avenue from the boatyard pretty much to the marina needs immediate short-term attention, and something needs to be done kind of quickly to address those issues. Just to reiterate what you guys are saying. Thank you.
Along those lines, Ellen, and Frank knows much more about this than I, but part of it is making sure that the existing infrastructure that's there is actually working. I believe some of the check valves are not working, as was pointed out in our riverfront meeting. Some of the infrastructure is collapsed. So we need to pay attention as part of this study to what has to be restored to function that's already in place.
Thank you, Bob. Joe Maglione, are you on? I'm going to ask if you are able to comment on the condition of the current valves. Paul Argenzio, are you able to make a comment?
Al, are you here?
Oh, there you are. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm having a little laptop problems, but I'm here. Yes, we have run a lot of the lines down that we have dug out some of them. Part of the problem is the sand and everything is washed back, covering those, and it's not an easy task to get in there and special permit in order to go onto the beaches with equipment. We've actually gone down there by hand and dug out some of the outfalls. And there has been some of the work done there. A lot of that is corrugated down there also, which doesn't help. But we have been doing as much as we really can. Like I say, it's going to have to be a lot of study to do in there.
So Aaron, I think that's probably a really good point that we should add in there to just look at the existing infrastructure and see short-term, what we can use short-term to try to get the existing infrastructure up and running.
We really need to get those outfalls reestablished underneath all the sand. Everything's washed. You could dig them out and you get one good storm and they're buried back in.
Joe, is that you speaking?
Excuse me?
Is that you, Joe Maglione?
Yes, it is, John.
Joe, quite a couple of questions. I know that a few years back on Gilbert Avenue, every time the tide would come in, the water would, the street would just flood, maybe 5-6 inches of water. After that, due to some phone calls, because I have relatives that live on that street, they cleaned out the outfall pipes, and I think they put flapper valves in to prevent.
Yes, they did on some of them. But
Okay.
the problem is some of them are a lot deeper, John, than others, where they've been filled in.
I know Wadley
outfall.
Avenue right now is having that same problem. And every time you get a high tide or a heavy rain combined with a high tide, the street just floods. Now, I know you can't control the heavy rain, but certainly if we had flapper valves on that particular street, that would control the water from backing in.
Which street, John, you are on that one you was at?
Wadley Avenue.
Yeah.
It's down near down near Acadia, that area there, down the end. But, and then there's a landing down there that has I believe it's either an 8 or a 10-inch outfall. And where does that water come from? And that's starting to be crushed right now.
Which, come back with that, John, because you were coming in with some back feed on you.
Down near, down near John Avenue, there's an old landing there, cement landing.
Yes.
And if you get on the other side of it, you could see the outfall pipe. And is that coming from North Shore Road by any chance?
That is coming down. If memory serves me correct, that is coming down, and they did do some work in that manhole also.
Okay. And
they have done work on that.
Just a suggestion, would it be feasible to put along a certain area down there Jersey barriers to prevent temporarily to prevent the water from topping over?
The water will just find its way around a Jersey barrier unless you made a solid wall.
Yeah, okay.
It's going to come and seep. May come in a little bit slower, but water will find its way around it. Unless it's a solid wall like you would see like on the beach wall or like you have on the ocean side.
Yeah.
You see what happens down the end of Harrington where that little bit of space is when we get those storms and the water comes in through there, and we've had to put piles of sand there in the past.
Yeah, I know.
Aaron, I might say that Joe and his guys who do great work are literally shoveling sand against the tide. And if every time they make a fix and it gets undone by a storm, we really need to try to come up with, as part of this effort, a more permanent solution so that what they do will stay fixed once they fix it.
Exactly. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
So I think we made some great progress here. I thank everybody for your comments and for your participation. I'm going to ask if anyone has any last moment comments, and then we're just going to talk about next steps. Okay, Carolyn.
Hi, everyone. As Elle and Aaron mentioned, I'm Carolyn Mecklenburg, and I work for the MVP program, and I'm really excited that we were able to fund this project. This meeting tonight itself just demonstrates what a big need there is for study in this area. So I'm really excited to just see how it goes, serve as a resource for this project as it moves forward. And if anyone has any questions about the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, we're run out of the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. So feel free to reach out to us with any other questions. But generally, I'm just excited to be able to support Elle and Aaron and the team as we move forward. So thanks for flagging this for me tonight and for having me.
Thank you, Carolyn, and thank you for your support.
Thank you.
So just some next steps. So I want to be conscious of everyone's time, and I appreciate you coming for this evening meeting. I do want to let everyone know we will be having a working session before we have another public session, and that will be scheduled for middle of January for the next session. The invitations will be going out by the end of this week so that everyone can plan accordingly. And we look forward to more conversations about the existing conditions and more thoughts and ideas from Brian and Aaron and his team at AECOM for recommended solutions as we move forward. And Aaron, do you have any final words?
Just thank you again for the time and the feedback. Really valuable what we heard tonight, and we're certainly going to take it going forward. And it's already given me some good ideas to share with our team and the city as we kind of move forward in the next steps. So just my thank you to everyone who participated and is involved with this effort.
Well, thank you, everyone. I hope you have a great night, and we look forward to seeing you after the holidays. Have a great holiday.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Will.
all. Nice job.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Night, everybody. Happy holidays.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Elaine.
Welcome.